Imagine opening your eyes in the middle of an Ice Age winter. You are somewhere on the frozen plains of what is now Ukraine, nearly 18,000 years before the first modern city will exist. The air entering your lungs feels sharp enough to cut. Every breath leaves a thin layer of ice around your nose. Your fingers begin losing sensation almost as soon as they leave the protection of your clothing. And beyond the entrance of your shelter, the wind moves across the empty landscape without a single forest to slow it down. There are almost no trees here. The cold pushed most of them south long ago, leaving behind open ground, frozen soil, and herds of enormous animals built to survive temperatures that could kill an unprotected human before nightfall. You have no thick fur, no claws, no layer of fat wrapped around your body. By every reasonable measure, you should not be living here. But you are. Behind you, a small fire burns. Meat hangs above the heat. Children sleep beside adults wrapped in layers of stitched animal hide. And surrounding all of you is something that would look completely insane to a modern person seeing it for the first time. Your home is built from mammoths. Massive skulls sit along the base like stones in a wall. Heavy jaws and long bones have been positioned around them. Curved tusks rise overhead, forming part of a frame that supports hides pulled tightly against the wind. What once belonged to an animal several times heavier than every person inside the shelter has now become the structure keeping those people alive. There are no steel axes here. No saws, no nails, no construction manuals, no weatherproof fabric ordered from a camping website, just stone tools, animal remains, accumulated knowledge, and a group of humans who looked at the skeleton of one of the largest creatures on Earth and realized it could become more than food. It could become a house. And this is not an imagined scene created for a survival movie. Archaeologists have uncovered real mammoth bone structures on the ancient plains of Eastern Europe. But to me, the most astonishing part is not that ancient people built with bones. It is that this solution was only one piece of a much larger survival system. The same humans learned to carry fire across frozen landscapes, extract hidden calories from shattered bones, turn poisonous substances into hunting weapons, perform medical procedures with stone tools, and preserve life-saving information inside stories long before writing existed. So today, we are going to explore some of the strangest, smartest, and most dangerous survival methods ancient humans ever used, in a world that offered them almost nothing except new ways to die. And by the end, you may never look at your warm bed, your kitchen stove, or that expensive camping equipment in quite the same way again. Before we step outside this mammoth bone shelter, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, which modern comfort would you miss first if you were trapped in the Ice Age? To understand why that mammoth bone shelter matters, you first have to forget the comfortable version of prehistory. Ancient humans did not spend their lives beneath endless sunshine while fruit dropped politely into their hands. Much of our story unfolded during periods when the climate shifted hard and fast. Winters could lock rivers beneath ice, summers could arrive late, dry out familiar water holes, or send herds along a different route. There was no harvest waiting in storage and no emergency meal hidden behind a cupboard door. If the hunt failed, the consequences did not appear as an empty plate. They appeared as weaker bodies, slower decisions, and fewer people waking up when spring returned. Every day was a negotiation with an environment that had no reason to compromise. That pressure explains why ancient survival methods often look strange to us. We judge them from rooms with insulated walls, running water, antibiotics, and food that has already been killed, cleaned, packaged, and delivered. They judged every object by a simpler question: can this keep someone alive? A bone was not waste. A flame was not decoration. A story was not entertainment. Even another person's memory could become a tool. Go back inside the shelter at Mesrich. The mammoth remains around you are not scattered randomly. Heavy skulls and jaws help form the lower structure. Long bones, tusks, hides, and probably other materials complete the enclosure. Archaeologists still debate exactly how every section was assembled, and that uncertainty matters. We should not pretend that a collapsed structure has handed us its original construction manual, but the surviving pattern shows planning, repeated labor, and a clear understanding of what different animal parts could do. Now imagine imagine the work before the first wall existed. A mammoth weighs several tons. Even after death, its head can be brutally heavy. Moving those bones across frozen ground would require ropes, sled-like supports, coordinated lifting, or repeated trips by many people. One person could not simply drag a skull home after dinner. So before the structure became architecture, it had already become a social project. That is the first point the popular image of the lone caveman gets wrong. Ancient survival was rarely a solo performance. A mammoth also represented far more than meat. Fat could be eaten or burned. Hide could become clothing, bedding, wind protection, containers, or bindings. Tendons could become cordage. Bone could become points, handles, supports, and fuel when wood was scarce. Tusks could become tools, art, structural elements, or raw material waiting for another need. To my mind, the extraordinary part is not that humans used all of these things. It is that they learned to see one animal as an entire system of future possibilities. Consider the bones left after a meal. To a hungry outsider, they might look finished, but many archaeological sites contain long bones broken in deliberate, repeated ways. The goal was marrow, the rich tissue sealed inside. In cold environments, that hidden fat could matter more than another mouthful of lean muscle. Protein is essential, but the human liver has limits on how much protein it can safely process for energy. A diet dominated by very lean meat can leave a person sick even while the stomach keeps receiving food. This is sometimes called rabbit starvation. The name sounds almost harmless. The reality is not. A person may feel hungry, nauseated, exhausted, and increasingly weak despite eating large quantities of meat. Without enough fat or carbohydrates, the body struggles to meet its energy needs. Ancient hunters did not know the biochemical language behind this problem, but repeated experience could teach the practical rule. Chase the fatty animals, save the organs, crack the bones. Do not confuse a full stomach with a nourished body. I find this deeply humbling. We tend to imagine science beginning when someone writes an equation, but long before laboratories, people were building knowledge from patterns observed across seasons and generations. The evidence was not printed in a journal. It was carried in stronger bodies, successful winters, and the terrible absence of those who ignored the lesson. Then there was fire. Fire seems obvious only because modern life hides its difficulty. You touch a button and a stove obeys. You turn a dial and warm air enters the room. For ancient people, fire had to be created, protected, fed, and understood. Friction methods demanded dry material and practiced hands. Spark-based methods required the right stones and tinder. Rain could erase hours of effort. Wind could turn a useful flame into a threat or kill it before it became stable. You can picture someone carrying a slow ember inside bark, fungus, ash, or another protective bundle while the group moved across the landscape. That person was not transporting convenience. They were carrying cooked food, warmth, light, predator protection, and the possibility of another night together. What would it feel like to watch that ember dim while freezing rain began to fall? But fire did more than defend humans from the environment. It allowed humans to interfere with it. Around Lake Malawi, Jessica Thompson and her colleagues combined stone tools, lake sediments, charcoal, and environmental evidence to argue that people were repeatedly burning landscapes by roughly 92,000 years ago. The researchers proposed that this activity contributed to the spread of more open woodland instead of dense forest regrowth. The interpretation is complex, and fire can have both human and natural causes. Still, the evidence points towards something larger than a campfire. Humans were beginning to shape where certain plants grew and how animals moved. That idea changes how I see ancient intelligence. The most important leap may not have been learning to control flame. It may have been recognizing that flame could control tomorrow. Burn an area today, and fresh growth may appear later. Fresh growth attracts grazing animals. Grazing animals bring meat, hide, bone, and fat back within reach. The fire is gone, but the decision continues working. At Border Cave in southern Africa, Lynn Wadley and her team found evidence of grass bedding dating to around 200,000 years ago. Some of it rested on ash. Ash may have created a cleaner surface and discouraged crawling insects. Old bedding could also be burned before fresh grass replaced it. This was not a mattress in the modern sense, but it shows people organizing living space, managing waste, and improving sleep with available materials. Think about how quietly brilliant that is. You do not need to understand insect biology to notice that certain surfaces attract fewer bites. You do not need formal physics to learn that a layer beneath your body changes warmth. Observation becomes habit. Habit becomes tradition. Tradition becomes technology. And then the technology begins moving with you. Clothing is one of the reasons humans could carry their fragile bodies into colder regions. Draping a hide over the shoulders is useful, but wind can enter from below and from every loose edge. Tailored clothing changes the equation. It closes gaps, it creates layers, it protects hands, feet, and heads. It lets warm air remain near the skin instead of escaping with every movement. Bone needles with carefully formed eyes reveal just how precise this work became. Ian Gilligan and other researchers have argued that eyed needles supported increasingly fitted and decorated clothing. A needle looks insignificant beside a mammoth skull, yet the smaller object may have opened more territory than the larger one ever could. Here is the stranger evidence. Clothing rarely survives for tens of thousands of years, but lice do. Melissa Toops, Andrew Kitchen, Jessica Light, and David Reed studied the genetic split between head lice and clothing lice. Because clothing lice live mainly in garments, their divergence offers an indirect clue to habitual clothing use. Their model placed that split at least around 83,000 years ago and possibly much earlier. It is not an exact birthday for clothing. Evolution does not provide receipts, but the parasite may preserve a history that the fabric itself could not. Once people could remain warm, they could plan more ambitious hunts. And the most dramatic hunts were not heroic duels between one hunter and one animal. They were coordinated operations in which people used terrain, noise, movement, and sometimes fire to guide herds toward traps, narrow passages, or dangerous drops. At later mass kill sites, large numbers of bison and other herd animals were driven into places where escape became difficult. Someone had to read the herd's direction. Others had to hide in the correct places. The group had to move at the correct moment without creating panic too early. Hunters near the front had to trust people they could not always see. If one person broke formation, the prey might scatter. If several people misjudged the turn, the herd might reverse directly through them. A successful mass hunt could create abundance. It could also create a new emergency. Meat spoils, predators arrive, hides require processing, bones are heavy, fat must be protected. Suddenly the problem is no longer how to kill enough food, but how to preserve, divide, defend, and transport more than the group can immediately consume. Ancient survival was full of these reversals. Solving one danger often produced another. Before we enter the darker methods, pause for a moment. Which invention has impressed you most so far? The mammoth shelter, hidden marrow, transported fire, tailored clothing, or the landscape turned into a hunting tool? Tell us in the comments. Share the video with someone who would choose differently, and subscribe, because the next solutions reveal what humans were willing to risk when ordinary methods stopped working. The darkest method is the one people mention most eagerly and understand least carefully. Human bones at several prehistoric sites carry cut marks, percussion damage, burning, or breakage patterns similar to those found on butchered animals. In some cases, the evidence supports cannibalism. What it does not automatically reveal is motive. Hunger is only one possibility. Other episodes may have involved violence, ritual, funerary behavior, or the deliberate humiliation of enemies. Archaeologist Sylvia Bello and other specialists have repeatedly shown how difficult it is to move from marks on bone to a complete human story. A cut can show that flesh was removed. It cannot tell you what the person holding the tool believed. That distinction matters. Prehistory was not one endless famine movie, and cannibalism was not a universal ancient diet. When starvation was involved, it showed how quickly ordinary rules could collapse under extreme pressure. When other motives were involved, it showed something equally uncomfortable. Intelligence does not always make humans kinder. Personally, I think we owe ancient people the same fairness we would demand for ourselves. Their bones are evidence, not permission to turn them into monsters. Poison reveals a different relationship with danger. Instead of meeting an animal's strength directly, hunters learned to borrow the chemistry of plants and use time as part of the weapon. For years, archaeologists suspected that some small southern African projectile points carried toxic substances, but organic compounds rarely survive long enough to prove it. Analysis of stone points from South Africa changed that picture. Researchers identified plant toxins on tools 60,000 years old, providing direct evidence that early hunters combined projectile technology with poison. The wound did not need to kill immediately. The toxin could weaken the prey, shorten a dangerous pursuit, and allow a small arrow to achieve what a much heavier spear might not. Now imagine discovering that recipe You begin with a bulb, leaf, insect, resin, or secretion that may injure you before it helps you. You must learn which part is active, how to extract it, how much to apply, what keeps it attached, and how to carry the weapon without poisoning yourself. Then you must teach someone else precisely enough that the knowledge does not die with you. That is not luck. It is controlled knowledge with delayed consequences. To me, poison reveals a surprisingly modern kind of imagination. The hunter must understand that an action now can produce an invisible effect later, perhaps far from the place where the arrow entered. It requires patience, planning, and trust in a chain of cause and effect that cannot be watched continuously. Plants demanded the same intelligence even when nobody intended to make a weapon. A landscape can appear full of food while hiding chemicals that damage organs, disrupt nerves, or stop the body from using oxygen. Smell is not always enough. Taste may become the mistake. Some edible plants resemble toxic relatives so closely that a beginner sees almost no difference. Ancient plant knowledge therefore became a map of exceptions. This root is safe only after soaking. That seed must be crushed and washed. This leaf can be eaten when young, but avoided later. Heat may destroy one toxin while failing against another. Which rule would you risk forgetting? The first experiments were not necessarily fatal. People could watch animals, begin with tiny amounts, notice bitterness, and compare reactions. But painful failures almost certainly occurred. The crucial achievement was converting one person's experience into group memory. This is where a taboo or ritual could become practical technology. A rule might preserve a food processing sequence even when nobody remembered the chemistry behind it. A story about a spirit inside an improperly prepared root could protect the child more effectively than a technical lecture. The explanation might be mythical while the behavior remained experimentally sound. Shelter worked through the same accumulation of observation. People did not need equations about heat transfer to notice that Earth changes temperature slowly. Partly underground structures could reduce wind exposure and remain more stable across hot days and cold nights. Snow, although freezing to touch, traps air and can insulate an enclosed space. Rock overhangs, hides brush, and compacted ground each solved a different version of the same problem. The smartest shelter was not the strongest one everywhere. It was the shelter matched to a particular night. Mobile groups also needed flexibility. They might use a cave during one season, a light hide structure while traveling, and a heavier dwelling at a repeatedly visited camp. A permanent house is useful only when remaining in one place is useful. Why build a wall around yourself if the herds and water will be somewhere else next month? Water may have been the most valuable resource people carried without moving it physically. Experienced foragers built mental maps of springs, rivers, seasonal pools, snow, plant moisture, and animal trails across huge territories. They remembered which source turned bitter in the dry season, which valley flooded after distant rain, and which birds flew toward water at dusk. This knowledge is easily underestimated because it leaves little archaeology behind. A spear point survives. A memory of a hidden spring does not. Yet that memory may have saved more lives. Our picture of ancient technology is biased toward objects hard enough to remain in the ground. At Liang Tabo Cave in Borneo, Tim Ryan Maloney and his colleagues described a person who lost the lower part of the left leg around 31,000 years ago and survived for another 6 to 9 years. The team interpreted the limb as a deliberate surgical amputation. Other researchers later proposed that a severe childhood fracture might explain the same evidence, so the interpretation remains debated. Whatever caused the loss, long survival required help. The individual needed food, protection, time to heal, and assistance moving through steep rainforest terrain. Infection was a constant threat. One body carried the injury, but an entire group absorbed its cost. Trepanation provides an even more startling example. In several prehistoric societies, people cut, drilled, or scraped openings into living skulls. Some skulls show new bone growth around the opening, proving that the person survived long enough for healing to begin. The reasons probably varied. The procedure may have addressed trauma, pain, seizures, ritual concerns, or beliefs that archaeology can no longer recover. The honest answer is that we do not always know. Someone opened a human skull with stone tools, and someone else lived afterward. Uncertainty does not make that less remarkable. A spear thrower is a shaped lever that extends the arm during a throw. In the Americas, one familiar name for it is atlatl. The device increases projectile speed and allows a hunter to strike from farther away. Michelle Beber and her colleagues tested this with more than 2,000 launches from over 100 modern participants. Their results showed that atlatl darts traveled faster than hand-thrown javelins and greatly reduced the average velocity difference between male and female throwers. That fascinates me because it reveals another purpose of technology. Tools do not only increase power, they can distribute power. A good invention allows more people to contribute, reduces dependence on the strongest body, and protects the group when one skilled hunter is injured. Ancient groups shared food, warmth, labor, childcare, warnings, and technical knowledge. They also kept some injured, elderly, or disabled people alive long after those individuals would have struggled alone. This was not sentimental decoration around the serious work of survival. Care protected memory, preserved skills, and strengthened trust. If you know the group will abandon you after one broken leg, why take the most dangerous position during a hunt? Cooperation creates courage because risk becomes easier to accept when survival is not entirely private. The phrase survival of the fittest is often used as if evolution rewards the most ruthless individual. But fitness means successful adaptation and reproduction, not victory in every physical contest. For humans, adaptation increasingly depended on relationships. The strongest hunter could die from one infection. A coordinated group could feed children, preserve expertise, and recover after losing a specialist. A story could encode where floods arrived, which animal attacked without warning, how a toxic route was prepared, or why a valley should be avoided after heavy rain. Facts attached to fear, humor, character, and consequence are easier to remember than disconnected instructions. Around a fire, entertainment and data storage became the same activity. Stories allowed human memory to exist outside one brain. A child could inherit an encounter that happened before birth. A hunter could avoid a mistake made by a dead relative. The group could travel with a library that weighed nothing. In my view, this may be the strangest survival technology of all. Humans learned to place experience inside other humans. Now look again at the mammoth bone shelter from the beginning. It is not one invention. Fire knowledge keeps the interior usable. Clothing allows builders to work outside. Nutritional knowledge makes the animal valuable in the correct order. Hunting and transport require coordination. Stories teach the next group where the bones came from and how they should be arranged. The house is not really made only from mammoths, it is made from memory. Once you see that, every method begins to connect. Poison is memory applied to chemistry. Clothing is memory applied to cold. Medicine is memory applied to injury. Cooperation is memory shared between living people. Ancient humans survived because each generation inherited a world already partly explained by the people who came before.